Planetfall is finally here. Hi everybody, this is Bob from Black Arrow Gaming and welcome to my pre-launch review of the newest entry in the Age of Wonders franchise. Before getting started, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Triumph Studios and Paradox Interactive for providing me with a free pre-launch copy of the game. I wouldn't have been able to do this otherwise and I really do appreciate it. With that said, let's do this. So of course you could just grab any pre-made character and jump right into a game, but I'm betting that most of you watching this video will probably check out the commander customization menu first. Those familiar with Age of Wonders 3 will feel right at home here. There are 6 races to pick from: the Vanguard, human space marines with sweet mechs and lots of guns; the Kirko, basically the Zerg, featuring overwhelming numbers and rapid colonial growth; the Syndicate, a faction of rich space merchants with a knack for espionage; the Amazon, female space elves with laser dinosaurs; the Devar, this game's equivalent of a Dreadnought dwarf; and the Assembly, a race of cyborgs that play an awful lot like a Necromancer type class, but with shotguns and buzzsaws. They're honestly kind of terrifying. I mean, seriously, look at this thing. It's like the Terminator and a zombie had a baby in a Home Depot. There are also 6 secret techs, which you could think of like classes. These each give you access to unique tech trees containing special units, weapon mods, doctrines, and strategic and tactical operations, which function kinda like spells did in the previous game. I'll get into that a bit later. The 6 options are Promethean, Synthesis, Celestian, Void Tech, Xenoplague, and Synumbra. I've only had time to try out Promethean, so I'm looking forward to experimenting with the others to see what they can do. The last important decision that you have to make when creating your commander is what perks you'll select. Leader perks are a new addition to Planetfall from previous entries in the series, and are divided into 4 categories: background perks, which are empire-wide buffs; colony supplements, which consist of early game boosts like a larger starting population or larger starting army; commander loadouts, which seem to vary based on your race and secret tech; and vices, which are empire-wide debuffs that usually also confer a bonus to your commander or your commander's army. You have 3 points available to spend on perks. Some perks cost 1 point, some cost 2, and the vices will refund either 1 or 2 points, allowing you to spend the extra points on more expensive perks in the other categories. So, what kind of character did I make? Well, in the spirit of colonizing new worlds, I decided to go with a Syndicate Promethean named Ronald McDarkside. Ronald is a misunderstood philanthropist who has devoted his life to bringing stability and peace to the galaxy, but keeps getting picked on by rogue anarchists. I gave him the Star Union Scholar perk, which allows for faster secret tech research and is helpful for getting a doomsday weapon quickly. I also gave him the Syndicate Close Combat Equipment perk, which grants increased health, increased melee damage, and a free melee weapon. Can you see what I'm going for here? Yep. You guessed it, Thanos. On the whole, setting up a new game is pretty similar to Age of Wonders 3 with a few noticeable exceptions. The first one jumps right out at you. What kind of planet will you settle on? The Imperial world is the default setting, which most likely has a balance of various planetary features. Frontier worlds won't have as many man-made structures on them, capital worlds will have more, and ravaged and infested worlds will most likely contain more natural hazards to make growing your colony more challenging. I've only tried the default Imperial world so far though, so I can't say for certain what the others are like just yet. The next big change that you might notice is that the game finally supports up to 12 players. This is something I've personally been hoping for, as I really enjoy 4X strategy games on big maps with lots of AIs to interact with. There are also 2 new victory conditions: Domination, which requires you to capture and hold a certain number of sectors, and Doomsday, which is basically a science victory with a kind of King of the Hill twist. The rest of the settings on this screen are fairly self-explanatory, so let's jump into the advanced setup. Again, most of the options here are self-explanatory, but there are a couple worth pointing out. First, under the Turns tab, you'll see options for a new Combat Cards mechanic. This limits the number of times that players can use manual combat for battles as opposed to auto combat. The mechanics of exactly how these cards work can be customized to your preference. For those who play PvP, this could help keep the game moving at a decent pace. Finally, under the World tab, check out the Climb Layout option. This lets you choose how climates are distributed across the planet. Poles will generate worlds similar to those in a standard Civilization game, with colder climates near the poles and warmer climates near the equator. Patches will result in a climate layout similar to Age of Wonders 3, with big chunks of certain biomes scattered randomly around the world. Noise is the third and final option. which will randomize the climate of each individual sector, resulting in a haphazard distribution of biomes all over the place. For my first game, I chose a medium-sized world with 6 players on normal difficulty and a Poles climate distribution. All that was left to do was select my syndicate leader and get the party started. Right after landing on the planet, you'll notice a number of things. Age of Wonders veterans will no doubt be familiar with some of these mechanics, but for the new players out there, I'll quickly go over the basics. Armies are composed of individual units that can be grouped into stacks of up to 6. Armies can be split up as needed, and units can be moved either individually or as a group. Each unit has a certain amount of movement points and a certain method of movement that affects how those points are used. For example, flying and floating units don't need to embark when moving from land tiles to water tiles, and are not slowed down when crossing rivers or chasms. Selecting an individual unit lists all of that unit's statistics as well as available actions, resistances, abilities, and other defining characteristics. Unit mods are also displayed here, which are one of my favorite new additions to Planetfall. Most units can activate up to 3 mods at a time, which can grant a variety of benefits, including improvements to damage output and accuracy, secondary status effects specific to the type of weapon damage being dealt, changes to elemental damage output, new abilities, and many other interesting buffs. Applying mods to units costs extra resources, but in my experience it was totally worth it. Certain mods pair very well with other mods and with certain kinds of units. For example, Syndicate Overseers have 2 different psionic buffs that can affect friendly units. The Focus Flames and Mantra of Clarity mods give additional benefits to psionic buffs, increased thermal resistance and better chance to avoid attacks, respectively. So applying those mods to my Overseers made their buffs far more powerful. Keep in mind, however, that some mods only work with certain types of units. In terms of global resources, there are 4 primary resource types that can be seen at the top of the main game screen. Energy, which is this game's equivalent of gold. Cosmite, a rarer resource used primarily for unit mods and more powerful late game units. Knowledge, which is used to unlock new technologies. And Influence, which is used primarily for diplomatic interactions. A quick side note here, not all structures require energy to build. Some of them only require production, which is a resource specific to individual colonies that determines how fast they can build or produce things. Food is another resource specific to individual colonies, but it can also be shared with other colonies in order to accelerate their growth. On the top right of the screen, you can also see your current level of popular support, your available tactical and strategic operation points, and your available doctrine slots. As I mentioned earlier, operations function similarly to spells from Age of Wonders 3, with tactical operations being used in tactical combat, and strategic operations being used on the world map. Doctrines, on the other hand, are political policies that confer various passive benefits to your empire. Operations and doctrines can be primed and activated under the Operations menu, and can be unlocked via research. Research is divided into 2 distinct tech trees, each of which has subcategories. The military tech tree is divided into 4 sections: racial techs, 2 weapon damage tech lines, which match the 2 preferred weapon types of your race, and your secret tech tree. The society tech tree is divided into 3 sections: doctrine, economy, and operations. The techs available in the doctrine section seem to depend on your race and class. Economic techs are exactly what they sound like. Operations techs can increase the number of tactical and strategic operations that can be used each turn, increase the number of available doctrines that you can have active at a given time, and grant access to new espionage abilities, which I'll get into a bit later. Perhaps the most noticeable difference between this game and its predecessor, however, is the division of the world map into sectors. Each sector has a dominant climate type and terrain type, both of which affect what kinds of resources that sector can provide when annexed to a colony. Sectors may also contain other landmarks and structures, which can confer extra resources or even grant the ability to construct buildings in the associated colony that would not otherwise be available, like the Rift Generator, which gives extra shielding to units produced in that colony. The resources that a sector provides to its parent colony can be increased by building exploitation structures on those sectors. Each sector can only contain one type of exploitation. Understanding which one to pick is still a bit confusing for me, but the general rule of thumb seems to be that you get the biggest return on your investment by building exploitations that match the dominant resources of the sectors that you put them in. So, unless you desperately need more of some other resource, it's probably best to build an agricultural exploitation in a sector that already generates a lot of food. As for the colonies themselves, you can think of them like city centers. Each colony can annex up to 4 sectors for a total of 5, including the colony sector itself. The number of sectors that can be annexed at any given time increases with the colony's population level, with the maximum number of sectors becoming available once the population reaches 16. In order to annex a new sector, you'll need to move a unit onto the central tile of that sector, select the tile, and select the option to annex it. One turn will pass before the sector is annexed, but you don't have to keep your unit on the tile in order for it to complete. Feel free to send it off to do dastardly things elsewhere, such as attempting to move your army onto a tile that is currently occupied by someone else's army will trigger either a combat preview or diplomatic options. One thing I noticed during my gameplay is that the combat preview doesn't always accurately depict how hard a battle will be, but once you become familiar with unit matchups, you can kind of figure that out for yourself anyway. In the combat preview, you can either select manual or auto combat. Manual combat allows you to control your units on the battlefield individually, while auto combat gives the computer control of your units and resolves the battle instantly. Most of the time, and especially in the early game, you'll want to use manual combat. Once my first battle began, the first thing I noticed is how beautiful and detailed the battlefield environments are. And I'm not just talking about aesthetics here. Battlefields are littered with boxes, crates, buildings, walls, bunkers, and even explosive containers that can all impact how a battle plays out. Even in non-urban areas, there are interesting terrain features such as hills, cliffs, and chasms that can be taken advantage of by either side. Many of the items and structures in urban areas can be destroyed with explosives, and some of them, like stacks of boxes and explosive containers, can be destroyed just by holding down the Alt key and targeting them directly. The next thing I noticed is how unit movement and action points work. All units have 3 action points at the beginning of their turn by default. Some abilities, like the more powerful sniper rifle shots, require all 3 action points to use. Others, such as a standard rifle shot from a basic infantry unit, will trigger multiple times based on how many action points you have left. When you select a unit, there are 4 colored zones that appear around them. Moving anywhere in the teal zone means you'll still have all 3 action points to spend. Moving into the light blue zone uses 1 action point, and moving even farther into the dark blue zone uses 2. Unlike Age of Wonders 3, however, you can actually move a unit even farther. Moving into the red zone expends your last action point, which prevents the unit from using any other abilities and even prevents them from guarding in a defensive mode after the turn ends. However, the unit can still adjust the direction they are facing in order to avoid being flanked, and can take cover behind obstacles as well. When you move a unit next to an obstacle, the unit will take cover behind that obstacle automatically. This is shown visually with a shield icon that covers whichever side of the hex that the unit is receiving cover from. A partially filled shield icon indicates partial cover, while a fully filled shield icon indicates a completely blocked line of sight. Other terrain features, including tall grass and smoke clouds, can provide similar benefits to cover by obscuring units that are standing on those tiles. Larger units, such as tanks and mechs, cannot take cover behind most obstacles. However, they can be used as cover by smaller units standing next to them. Attacks that target a unit in cover or an obscured unit are more likely to miss or simply graze the target. That brings me to my next point. Almost all attacks have a percentage-based chance to either graze the target for reduced damage or miss the target entirely. Now, if you're a veteran Age of Wonders player, I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't this make all the units on the battlefield function similarly to the dang halflings from Age of Wonders 3, which could just randomly get lucky and avoid attacks? Well, yes and no. It's really not that bad, and here's why. With no cover and at close range, which seems to be within 3 tiles for most units, range attacks generally have a 95% chance to hit the target. Maybe I got a little lucky, but in my entire first game I don't remember ever missing an attack from this range, and if I did, the attack probably at least grazed the target. That 95% chance to hit goes down as the distance to the target increases, and it also drops if the target is either positioned behind cover or obscured. You can also increase your chance to hit enemy units by boosting unit accuracy via promotions and unit mods, and by intelligently using units with abilities like Steady Aim, which gives an accuracy boost when firing from cover. This means that your chance to hit an enemy target or avoid attacks isn't based purely on luck. By understanding how all these mechanics work and by positioning your units accordingly, you can use the cover system to give your army an edge in battle. Just remember that a lot of objects that provide cover can be destroyed. Oh, and it's also probably not a good idea to take cover directly behind the big red containers. Overall, tactical combat seems to be a lot more engaging this time around, and the AI also seems to behave a bit more intelligently as well, which is encouraging. For example, if the AI opponent is winning a battle, it will often try to run damaged units away from the heavy fighting in order to avoid losing them. AI opponents are also generally pretty good at using cover effectively, even as they are advancing. That being said, I do have a couple minor gripes about tactical combat. The first is that the mix of flying and ground-based units can sometimes make selecting and moving specific units a bit of a hassle. Flying units can now occupy the same tile as units underneath them, so they can kind of get in the way sometimes, but adjusting the camera can help get around this problem. Another minor annoyance, at least for me, was the guy that kept making an announcement every time I killed an enemy unit.
Enemy destroyed.
I ended up turning down the speech volume in the audio settings because of this. Of course, it's more of a personal preference thing, but I really don't need an announcer confirming every kill that I get.
He's probably taken the most damage, so move in with her. Whoop, whoop. Oh, I forgot that guy wasn't dead.
Of course, violence isn't always the answer. As the late English author Edward Bulwer-Lytton once said, the pen is mightier than the sword. Edward clearly never attempted to bring a pen to a sword fight, but there is still a lesson to be learned here. Diplomacy can be a powerful tool in Planetfall, and there are many more diplomatic options in this game than there were in Age of Wonders 3, including an all-new espionage system. When interacting directly with the AI leaders, you may want to start by checking out the Relations panel on the top right. Here you can see your global reputation, as well as your reputation with the specific leader that you're interacting with. Your global reputation influences your individual relationships, and both are based primarily on your in-game actions and behavior towards other players and factions. This panel also shows what your opinion is of the other leader, although I'm still not entirely certain whether that affects diplomacy in any meaningful way. Underneath the Pact section of this panel, you can see a chart containing information on that leader's current treaties and relationships with every other player in the game that you have met. At the bottom, you can also see your current active treaties, as well as your casus belli points against that player, which can be used as diplomatic justification for war. Declaring war without sufficient justification harms your global reputation, and can cause your domestic popular support to decrease. However, declaring war with good cause does not harm your global reputation, and can actually increase your popular support. Entering the negotiation screen brings up the trade panel, where treaties, resources, and even sectors can be exchanged. You can also ask the other player to become your vassal, or even offer to become their vassal, but I'm not sure what would happen if you did so. One change from Age of Wonders 3 to note here is that, as far as I can tell, it doesn't appear that you can trade items with other players. The pronouncements menu contains other diplomatic interactions, including options to compliment other players, insult other players, privately warn other players about specific actions, or publicly denounce them for specific actions. Some of these options require you to spend influence points to use them, which is a resource that can be accumulated throughout the game through a variety of means, including political doctrines and interactions with smaller NPC factions. Speaking of NPC factions, which are basically this game's equivalent of independent dwellings, they feel much more important this time around and work quite a bit differently. In my game, I came across a structure that was inhabited by these bioluminescent psychic fish. Turns out that glowing psychic fish can talk, or at least communicate telepathically, so they introduced me to their nearest dwelling. Instead of attacking them, I began doing quests for their dwelling and eventually was able to use the influence that I gained from doing those quests to politely ask them to leave the structure that I wanted to annex to my colony. As the game progressed, my relationship with the Psy-Fish continued to blossom and eventually led to some pretty nice benefits. For one thing, they gave me a lot of free units for doing quests. As our relationship improved, however, I was also able to buy units and unit mods from them with influence. At the maximum relationship level, I was even able to buy a Tier 4 Medusa unit. I could also ask them to lend aid in an ongoing war in exchange for influence and energy. They actually had a lot of units all over the place, so that probably would have helped me out quite a bit considering that I was at war with someone across the sea, and my fishy friends were right in between the both of us. But I was worried that my naval power might not be sufficient to protect them if needed, and decided that the potential military benefits wouldn't be worth the economic risk. After all, psychic fish friends are far more helpful than psychic fish stick friends. Finally, any discussion of diplomacy in this game would be missing something without a corresponding discussion of espionage. Mechanically speaking, espionage operations are strategic operations that can be very useful tools in both shaping your relationships with other players and in giving you a strategic edge over your opponents. Espionage operations can be used to steal resources or even strategic information, like maps, from other players. They can also be used to incite rebellions, fabricate casus belli against other players, spy on certain sections of the map, or defend your own empire against hostile espionage attempts. Bear in mind that failed espionage attempts can damage your own reputation, so be careful who you spy on. I really have enjoyed my time with Planetfall so far. The improved research trees, excellent tactical combat, and enhanced diplomacy options are all welcome additions to the game. I do still find sectors and sector exploitation to be a bit confusing, and part of me misses the freedom to build cities on any tile that I want. But given time and experience, I think I'll become more comfortable with it. Just because something is different doesn't necessarily make it better or worse, and many of the systems in Planetfall require sectors to function the way that they do in order to work. I did win a Doomsday victory in my game, which required researching the entire Promethean secret tech tree, building 3 Pyrex refineries, launching an expensive planetary purification operation, and defending my 3 refineries for 10 turns. Everyone immediately declared war on me. I can't imagine why. And my neighbors tried to stop me, but it did still feel kind of easy. Then again, I was only playing on normal difficulty and on a medium-sized map, so that might be why. Aside from some of the other minor complaints that I mentioned earlier, I really can't say anything bad about Planetfall so far. Triumph Studios did an outstanding job with Age of Wonders 3, and it appears that this new game will be no different. If you're a fan of the Age of Wonders franchise, or even just a fan of 4X strategy titles in general, I think you'll enjoy Age of Wonders Planetfall. If you'd like to see more Age of Wonders gameplay, please be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Black Arrow Gaming. I've been posting gameplay for Age of Wonders 3 for years and will be covering Planetfall as well. My channel has grown into a friendly community of players who are happy to share advice and strategy with newcomers and experts alike. Feel free to join us, and thanks so much for watching.